Hi everyone, I'm recording on YouTube this week, and this week we're going to look at the aftermath of the early Islamic conquests that we discussed in the last class, and we're going to look at them in light of the claims that Islamic civilization is making to replace the stability and the sophistication that had been achieved by the Roman Empire. And we're going to see how there are many ways in which this claim is justified. There are further conquests, and there's the development of an intellectual culture that is immensely important to the preservation and development of Western civilization. At the same time, there are also challenges and limits to Islam's efforts to replace Rome. We're going to see that there are divisions within the Islamic community. We're going to see Islamic armies suffer a series of defeats that will mark the limits of Islamic ability to replace or to succeed the Roman Empire. Now, these divisions in Islam are based on questions about authority, and they have been in Islam from the beginning. But as we reach the middle of the 7th century, as we reach about 30 years after the death of Muhammad, they start to rise to the surface. One second here. These divisions relate to leadership of the Islamic community. Remember that Abu Bakr became the caliph. He became the successor of the Prophet Muhammad because he was seen as best at offering prayers to Allah. And this is the basis of Sunni Islam. At the same time, there were other Muslims who felt that authority over the Islamic community should be determined by a biological connection to the Prophet Muhammad, rather than a connection based on religious authority. This idea that leadership in Islam should be based on a biological connection to Muhammad is called Shia Islam. Now, the Shia Muslims felt that the successor to Muhammad after Muhammad's death should be his son-in-law Ali. However, Ali was seen as part of the next generation. Abu Bakr was older. There was a sense, well, Abu Bakr's going to have his time, but then Ali will succeed. And so the Shias are willing to allow Abu Bakr to become the first caliph. Then there's a little more resistance after Abu Bakr dies, but he dies after only 2 years. Ali is still pretty young. And the second caliph is Umar, who's going to be one of the great generals in the early history of Islam. Then Umar dies. Remember, Umar also dies pretty quickly because he is assassinated. He dies in the 640s, and now there's concern among these Muslims, these members of the Muslim community who wouldn't call themselves Shia Muslims, but they are the basis for what today we describe as Shia Muslims. There's growing concern that Ali is passed over again. He's passed over again for the next caliph named Uthman. And under Uthman, as we saw last time, Islamic territory continues to expand. The region of Egypt, the rest of the Persian Empire. And so there are great successes for the Islamic armies at this time, but at the same time, Uthman is not popular. Uthman is seen as a bureaucrat rather than a warrior. And so he remains in the city of Medina. He governs this large empire in increasingly luxurious style. He's not seen as struggling to advance Islam on the front lines. And so warriors in Islam start to resent this. Remember that Uthman is one of Muhammad's very first converts, and he comes from this very wealthy Umayyad family. And so now it's kind of seen that he's come to this position through his family background. He's coming to it from a position of privilege. He's kind of abusing that privilege by living a more lazy, bureaucratic lifestyle, and he's not popular. And so in 656, a group of rebels break into Umar's residence and they kill him. With Uthman's death, there is uncertainty and conflict within the Islamic world as to who should succeed him. On the one hand, the Shias are now more and more insistent that the next caliph should be Ali. But there's another candidate named Muawiyah, who's a very interesting and complex character. He is the governor of Syria, so he controls one of the wealthiest provinces in the Islamic Empire, and he controls the largest army. So from a Sunni perspective, you could say this man is most equipped to be the leader of the Islamic community. But there are some issues with Muawiyah. For one, it's known that he hadn't converted to Islam until Muhammad had returned to Mecca in 630, after Muhammad had been driven out to Medina. And there's even a rumor that Muawiyah had been among those who drove Muhammad out of Mecca and made him flee across the desert to Medina. Now, since then, Muawiyah, through his military talents, through his administrative talents, had made himself a very important member of the hierarchy in the Islamic community, through his skills as a military commander and an administrator. And he had developed the Syrian army from a raiding Arab army into a sophisticated military machine that the Islamic community would need if they were going to continue to expand their empire. After Muawiyah's cousin Uthman is assassinated, Muawiyah condemns Ali. He says, "You were the mayor of Medina. Uthman may have been the caliph of the whole empire, but you were basically the mayor of Medina, and you didn't prevent this assassination." And so there's kind of a subtext here that Muawiyah, a great politician, is introducing into the conversation that Ali is somehow responsible for this assassination, that he was somehow okay with this assassination taking place. Maybe he even knew that it was happening and was okay with it. Nevertheless, at this point, there's widespread resistance within the Islamic community to someone like Muawiyah, who is credibly accused of persecuting the very founder of this religion, that he's going to become the caliph. And so in the end, Ali is the only viable candidate, and the rest of the Islamic leadership group respects and accepts this. I think it raises an interesting question. When and how can you trust someone in terms of politics? How much do you trust when someone has changed? Are they changing just for political reasons? Have they genuinely changed? It's pretty typical for us to assume people are only changing for political reasons, but we don't know that that's necessarily the case. In the end, the only group that refused to accept Ali was a group called the Khawarij. And the Khawarij were the most radical subgroup within Islam, and they are the ancestors of radical Muslim groups today. And they reject Ali, not because they didn't think he should be the caliph, they actually thought he should. They were Shia radicals. They thought Ali should become caliph, but they objected to the fact that in the end, he simply negotiated his way to becoming caliph. He accepted being passed over for Abu Bakr, for Umar, and for Uthman, and then he just negotiated his way to be caliph rather than Muawiyah. For them, this is a sign that he's not really trusting in God, that he's trusting in politics rather than in God. And so they rebel against him, and Ali defeats them. You would think that would be good enough. But then in 660, one of them assassinates Ali with a poisoned dagger as he's praying in the mosque. And now Muawiyah is going to become the caliph simply because there are no other viable candidates that are going to be acceptable to the vast majority of Muslims. A large number of whom thought that Muawiyah was the leader that they should have picked in the first place. And so Muawiyah is crowned the caliph in the Muslim holy city of Jerusalem, and he gives his name to a new Islamic dynasty, the Umayyads. And they establish a capital city in Damascus. A couple of significant things that are going on here, but what's kind of the predominant significance is that this new capital is in Damascus and not in Arabia. Remember that Arabia had been the foundations of Islam. We looked at Arabia to try and understand the origins of Islam. And now, within a couple of generations, the caliph, the religious political leader of Islam, is moving the capital. He's moving the capital out of Arabia. He's moving it into Syria. This is important because it shows that the focus of the Islamic world is no longer just on Arabia. It shows that Islam is no longer just an Arabian construct or an Arabian development. Islam is focused on the Mediterranean world more broadly. So it's shifted its center of operations to the west. It's shifted its center of political power into what had been territory of the Roman Empire. So this is Islamic culture, not necessarily particularly consciously, but certainly in actuality, making its claim to be a successor to the Roman Empire. Nevertheless, the Shiites, the Shia Muslims, rejected Muawiyah. This marks the permanent break between the Sunni and Shiite branches of Islam. And so Muawiyah is not accepted by the Shiites, and they remain committed to the idea that rulership should be elected and inspired, and it should be religious rather than the most effective political leader of the period. Okay, we're going to talk more about Muslim expansion and the limits of Muslim expansion in the next video.